So good morning, everybody, and welcome back after a wonderful, hopefully a wonderful Labor Day weekend. It's great to see everybody again via Zoom. Seeing detecting that we have quorum here on our channel. We are going to start our proceedings. So good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Built Heritage Subcommittee meeting of September 8th. 2020. I'd like to call the members to order. This meeting is being held remotely through Zoom, which is necessary in these times of physical distancing to keep everyone safe during the pandemic. Please note that those who do not need to participate in the meeting can also watch it on the live stream on the Ottawa City Council YouTube channel. A reminder to participants to please keep your microphones muted until I call on you to speak. I will be providing each committee member with the opportunity to ask questions or comment on each item in order in which they raise their hand in Zoom. Committee members will be called on first, followed by any other members of council who have joined the meeting. For panelists, the raise hand option is found at the bottom of the participants list. For attendees, you will find the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom window. For those calling in, press *9 to raise your hand. The committee coordinator and I will be watching for those cues. The usual 5-minute speaking limit will apply. Members are also reminded to submit any motions, visual supports, or declarations of interest in writing to the coordinator at their earliest convenience. Although the deadlines have passed for residents to register to speak and provide written submissions to this subcommittee, residents may still make submissions to the September 10th Planning Committee meeting on item 1, that's 175 Main Street, or written submissions to council on item 2, which is 235 Mariposa Avenue. That's 175 Main Street, or written submissions to council on item 2, which is 235. And we're getting some feedback, so I don't know if somebody has their microphone on. It'd be great if they can turn their microphone off. And we're getting some feedback. If you have technical difficulties signing into the meeting, you can contact the clerk's office at committee@ottawa.ca or by calling 613-580-2424 extension 22953. A reminder that if participants are having technical issues with their Zoom connection, they may call in using the backup telephone number provided by the coordinator. So those are just the opening notes. So I'm going to move on to with our agenda. Moving on with regrets. I've actually received no regrets, so I'm going to ask the committee coordinator to please call the roll.
Hello, Chair King. Eric is just having some technical difficulties, so I'll call the roll on his behalf. Member Halsall.
Here.
Member Podolsky.
Here.
Councillor Shirelli. Councillor McKenney.
Here.
Member Conforti.
Here.
Councillor Brockington.
I'm here.
Councillor Moffat.
Here.
Member Quinn.
Here.
Chair King.
Here.
You have a quorum, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much. Moving on to declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none, we're moving on to the confirmation of minutes for the minutes of Tuesday, August the 11th, 2020. Are the minutes confirmed?
Confirmed.
Confirmed. Thank you. So now moving on to our first item for planning, infrastructure, and economic development, right-of-way, heritage, and urban design services. Number 1, an application to alter 175 Main Street, the Châtelet building, a property designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. So can staff please provide an overview of this report?
Good morning, Chair. Yes, I can. Before I switch off my video, can everyone hear me okay? Barry is Chair or Member Podolsky, you can't hear me?
Very, very faint.
Shoot. Is anybody else having trouble?
Turn your volume up, Barry.
I can hear you well.
I can try without headphones. Is that better or worse?
That is
Yeah,
better.
that's good.
That's better. Okay, thanks. So we'll go with that. So thank you for that. So I'll just start my presentation. Thank you. Okay, I think you can see it on the screen there. So good morning, members of the committee. The application is to alter 175 Main Street, the Châtelet building, a property designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Next slide. The property is located between Main Street and the Ottawa River in the community of Old Ottawa East. Next. Some photos of the building here. It is a classically inspired 5-story stone structure. It was constructed in 1885 as a scholasticate for the Oblates of Mary Immaculate, a missionary order. Next slide. The building is set back from Main Street and features a wide tree-lined alley that leads to a forecourt. Next. This is a site plan showing the application in front of you today. It is for removal of the chapel wing, which I have, you can see there in red, and the creation of a temporary infill wall. It also includes the demolition of the porch at the rear of the building. Next slide. Photos showing, these are photos showing the sides of the chapel wing, the north and the south facades. It was constructed circa 1950 to replace an earlier smaller wing that housed the original chapel. Next. These are some elevations of the proposal. As you can see, there's no changes proposed to the front facade. Next. These are the two side views. The gray area shows the chapel wing, which is proposed to be demolished. Next. This is the rear of the building. It's the east facade. It shows the demolition of the chapel wing and the porches, which are proposed to be removed as well in gray. Next slide. The opening in the facade that's created by the removal of the wing will be stabilized and protected through the creation of a temporary infill wall. There's a cross section of that wall on the screen and it's in the report. Next slide. So the chapel wing contains the chapel itself, which is a heritage attribute of the building. These are some photos of the chapel before and after it was deconsecrated. It was designed by Montreal architect Louis J. Lapierre. It's a narrow rectangular room with regularly spaced windows, concrete construction, and buttress-like columns and a vaulted ceiling. Next slide. So the alterations in front of you today are to accommodate the adaptive reuse of the primary portion of the building into a mixed-use facility, which would include an elementary school from the Conseil des Écoles Catholiques de Centre-Est, the French Catholic School Board, a community center with the City of Ottawa, and potential future residential uses. Next slide. In 2019, the building was conditionally sold to the school board. The school board does not require the chapel wing for programming, nor can they find another suitable use. Similarly, Recreation Services determined that the chapel wing and the chapel itself is not adequate for a community center with a gymnasium for several reasons, notably size, safety, and accessibility. Next slide. To go through the processes, because there's a few of them, in front of you today is the heritage permit application. There's also a concurrent zoning bylaw amendment to permit the use of a school, which will be going to planning committee concurrently on Thursday. And then finally, a letter of understanding between Recreation Services and the school board, which will be brought forward in October to council. So heritage staff are recommending approval of the demolition of the chapel wing for a combination of the following reasons. And all of these reasons are detailed further in the staff report. The first is that the proposal will establish a continued use for a significant historic place. The building has been vacant since 2016, and various opportunities for potential adaptive reuse have been explored, including a retirement residence, a community hub, and residential, commercial, and live-work concepts. Throughout this process, the chapel wing has presented a significant challenge to the overall adaptive use due to its narrow configuration, its layout, construction, and structural integrity. Next slide. The proposal conserves the overall cultural heritage value of the Châtelet building. When it was designated in 2013, the value of the building was defined as its historical associations with the Oblates, its architectural value as an excellent example of Roman Catholic institutional building, and its contextual value for its setting. The proposed adaptive reuse retains these overall values and rehabilitates the significant portion of the designated building. The chapel addition is a later addition, or the chapel wing rather, is a later addition located at the rear of the building with limited visibility from the public realm, and the chapel itself that is an interior attribute with no public access. Next slide. The chapel wing will be documented through photographs, and the chapel will be laser scanned. In advance of this application, Regional Group has contacted the Oblates Archives to advise them of the demolition and confirmed that there were no remaining elements or artifacts that they would like to be conserved. In addition, staff have included a condition to retain the stained glass windows for incorporation on site as part of future development or public art. The Rationale building is an evolving cultural landscape that has been modified significantly since its construction, and that staff believe can continue to evolve in a manner that maintains its cultural heritage value. So you can see on screen, there are photos from 1885, its original construction, in 1925, the addition of 2 wings to the north and south, and then another addition in 1950 showing the addition of a 5th floor and classically inspired elements. In addition, the chapel that we are discussing today was constructed 65 years after the original building and replaced the original chapel. So even in the statement of significance, it notes that the building has evolved drastically since its construction. Next slide. Staff reviewed the proposal to determine that it meets the Parks Canada standards and guidelines as outlined in more detail in the staff report. The applicable guidelines are up on the screen. Next slide, building condition. Well, the condition of the chapel wing is not the primary reason that staff are supporting the demolition. It's important to note that significant structural upgrades and remediation would be required for any reuse scenario. Some of the issues that have been identified include deteriorating concrete, cracks in the floor and ceiling of the chapel, spalling, and evidence of water damage to the stipple finish. In addition, a designated substance survey revealed asbestos throughout the building, including in the plaster of the chapel walls and decorative arches, and the applicant will speak to the building condition in more detail. Next slide, consultation. In terms of consultation, Councillor Menard, Heritage Ottawa, and the community associations have been notified of the application and have all provided comments. Neighbors within 30 meters of the property were also notified of the application. And then finally, recommendations. Staff are recommending the approval to alter conditional upon the approval of the zoning bylaw amendment, which is running concurrently to permit the building to be converted to a school to be in full force and effect, the documentation of the building, and the retention of the stained glass windows, to delegate authority for minor design changes to the GM of PIDE, and to issue the heritage permit with a 3-year expiry date. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne, for that detailed report. We have a number of speakers who are registered. I know that Paul Goodkey of the Old Ottawa East Community Association is first on the list.
Yes, hello.
Yes.
Yes, this is Paul Goodkey. Thanks for this opportunity to make some verbal comments. I trust that everybody has my written submission memorandum. And I noticed this morning that I hadn't included a copy of the Cunliffe and Associate report dated November 2016, on November 30th. That's the report I'm referring to on pages 4, 5, and 6 of my written submission. And it is a structural assessment that is not available on the website. So it's very important that in order to understand what I'm saying, that you have that report. I don't know why it wasn't on the website. It was provided to the association and members of our planning committee by Sally back in April, perhaps May. I just want to, there's not much more I can say. I'm so disappointed that there's even a consideration of removing the chapel wing. What I've provided you is a critique of the misinformation that's been provided about the structure. The structure is, there's no major issues with the structure. Anything that needs to be done would have been known by regional when they purchased the property. I think the city and regional can do much better than what they have come up with so far. The community at large hasn't really been kept abreast of the details of discussions that have gone on. But again, the most important thing for me to point out to you is that there are no major structural issues with the chapel wing. And I strongly suggest that it should be used. And I just, when I look at the chapel and I look at the area below the chapel, the dining hall, I mean, these are fantastic spaces for reuse. Problem is, I don't think there has been enough thought put into looking for partners. It seems to me what should happen is simply sever the chapel wing from the Châtelet main building and have the school board get on with the work that they want to do in the main building, and get on with removing the designated substances within the chapel wing, because that has to be done anyway prior to any demolition or refurbishing. Then you'll get a really good idea of what a fabulous space this is. When I first heard of this, I thought, oh, geez, I guess you could just come along and say, well, let's take the library off.
1 minute left.
Let's just take the library off the back of the Parliament buildings. Nobody's going to notice from the front anyway. It's part of the structure, as is the chapel. The other day, I rode by the Governor General's residence, and I rode on my bike, and I said, "What the heck? This is very noticeable that these wings are different." Wow, I guess it'd be okay to demolish those too. Doesn't make sense to me. I hope that there's some reasoning here, and that the chapel wing is saved. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Goodkey. And we do have a number of questions. I think the first person who raised their hand was Member Brockington.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to yield the floor to the local councillor. I'd like Councillor Menard to go first.
And I'm absolutely fine with that, Councillor Menard.
I can go first. Thanks very much, Chair King and Mr. Goodkey, for your presentation and your in-depth engagement on this. I know your questions have made the potential result of this better, regardless of the way that it goes. And so I just wanted to ask you. You mentioned the structural elements of the chapel wing, and I've also reviewed those reports. But in the report that's in front of us today, the main reason cited for the proposed demolition of the chapel wing is part of an adaptive reuse of the building and balanced by the repurposing of the main building as a school and community center for reuse. And so understanding the structural comments that you're making, and I think many would agree, what about the piece in the report that does speak to that adaptive reuse of the remaining portions of the building and the evolving nature of the importance of a school, community center, and use of that remaining portions of the building? Just get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I haven't really. there isn't much information. There's, you know, thoughts that the community center would go in on the northern end, on the first floor of the front de Châtelet building. And then, you know, a cube added to the north of the building as an entrance to a gymnasium at the north. I don't think there's enough room for a full-size gym in that location. I don't think you should be building anywhere near the north end of the de Châtelet building. There should be huge setbacks. You don't just put another building 3 meters away. Those side entrances to the north and south ground floor entrances to the building, it looks like they're going to be chopped off. I mean, they're an important part of the building. You know, give the de Châtelet building a little bit of, not a little bit, give it a lot of prominence. Don't build right up next to it with a gymnasium and or community center, whatever that is. I haven't seen any drawings that show where the community center would go, how big the community center would be. The gym that I see on that site, I mean, it's only 30 meters property line to property line. You can't put a full-size gym in there anyway. And the chapel, I mean, it's perfect. Have you looked at the drawings? If you look at the, you get all kinds of dimensions on the report, November 30th, 2016 report that Cunliffe did. You've got all kinds of dimensions on that in that report that show you, you know, oh boy, you could use that chapel for volleyball, pickleball, cross-court basketball. It's a perfect recreational space. The occupancy is perfect. I mean, it was designed to be a chapel. So to me, it's a no-brainer. But I don't have all of the information. So, and you guys don't have all of the information. This thing shouldn't just be going ahead like this. Tear off the chapel, put up a temporary wall. What are you going to fix that temporary wall with? What are you going to? I mean, way too soon. Not enough information given to the community, not enough information given to decision makers. It's like you have this CHIS. The first one said we were going to de-designate. That didn't get on the website, but the next one did. With a little, you know, just change that wording. And then, well, lo and behold, in late August, we get a revised CHIS that, if you look at what I sent you my notes to self, and you look at the differences. I mean, it's the one thing that really bugs me about that CHIS is it says that a Châtelet building is in the residential mixed-use designation. As soon as I see that, and I've seen that in lots of reports, I say, what? These guys don't know what they're talking about. This building is in the mixed-use designation. And as far as the structure goes, I know everybody would like to have a compromise, but let's have all the information on the table and let's really think, should this building be demolished with the spaces in it that are perfect to be remediated and be used for community use? I think so. I think it is. I don't know if that answers your question, Sean, but
yes, thank you, Paul. And I know how engaged you are on this and passionate about it, and I appreciate you speaking about it. Thank you.
thank you.
We have another question from Member Brockington.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Goodkey. I don't have your memo in front of me. We did get a number of submissions before the weekend. Can you just remind the committee who you are in the context of this file? Are you a neighbor? Are you on the community association? Which hat are you wearing?
Yeah, I'm an engineer. I have lived in Old Ottawa East for 39 years.
Okay.
I started the planning committee of Old Ottawa East. I was very much involved in the community design plan, secondary plan. I'm a detail type guy, you know. Yeah, that's me.
Excellent, thank you. How has the city reached out to the community? How have you been involved? The staff report today said the local councillor and people 30 meters from the site were engaged. They were silent on any opposition, and here we are now receiving delegations this morning, a little bit of a surprise. So how have members of the community been engaged?
I've tried to engage them. I think this pandemic has caused, people can't get together and talk about things. But I don't think the community has been engaged. I mean, I've tried to. I've had lots of dialogue with the community association and some other people. Like, I don't know a heck of a lot of people. It's not me to go out and schmooze with people. I don't like having my name in the paper. I don't like that. So I don't like doing this. I'm not very good at it either. But I'd say that no, there hasn't been good engagement. The community association and CAG have been involved for years, but it's all been wishy-washy. It's like, we're trying to do this and we've got these partners and now we've got these. And finally, whoa, this became serious when the school board said, we want this school and we want it. We want to be building. We want to be in it next year. Whoa. Okay, well, I guess this is really going to move along. I don't think you can do all that in that amount of time, but to their credit, they've gone ahead and got quotes to take the designated substances out of the third floor, and the elevator shafts and the stairs. I know all this stuff, but I tell you, the community has really been out in the left field. I
appreciate
have
that.
a feel for the overall community. I do have a feel for the community association board, and the majority of them think as long as we can get a community center and a full-size gymnasium, and this is a good compromise. And I have to scratch my head because I've been involved since 2006. And the community design plan and CDP came out in 2011. That's a lot of time to be spending. So I hope I answered your question. I don't think the community at large knows.
Okay, I appreciate that comment, and I think some of my colleagues have some further comments for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Brockington. Member Podolsky wants to ask you some questions as well.
Hello, everybody. Chair King, I don't have a question for Paul Goodkey. I've read his report. It's very thorough. It's very persuasive. At a certain point, I would like to know when members of the Built Heritage Subcommittee can pose questions to staff. And I'll wait for that part to come on the agenda.
Okay, and that will be after questions to deputants. And we have one more person with their hand up, Member Conforti.
Just like Barry, I had questions for staff as well. So, and thank you, Mr. Goodkey, for your comments. I don't have questions for you though.
Okay. Thank you for that. The next deputant is Kelly Rodenizer.
Good morning. Can everybody hear me? Great.
Yes.
So my name is Kelly Rodenizer. I'm with the regional group, and we are the applicant of the demolition of the Deschatelet Chapel Wing. I brought my team with me to provide you some details and address any technical questions that you might have on our application. I have Gord, Laurier, and Doug from Harbin Architecture. They've been working with us on this file since 2014. John Stewart, who is the author of the CHIS, who is our heritage expert, and Rick Cunliffe, our structural engineer. I wanted to provide you with some additional background and context to why we're requesting the demolition of the chapel wing that was built in the 1950s by the in-house team of the Blatt's fathers, who undertook the construction themselves. Anne went into quite a bit of detail, but I wanted to give you sort of an overview from Regional's perspective. As most of you probably are aware, we purchased Greystone Village, as it is known now, from the Abat's fathers in 2015. Our team has been working to repurpose the Deschâtelet building since that time. We looked at converting the Deschâtelet into a retirement residence and had several retirement operators tour the building. They also determined that the chapel wing of the building was not suitable for their uses. None of those went forward. Second, Regional was in contract with CADCO, under contract with CADCO to purchase the building, and Regional worked with them from 2016 all the way through to 2018 to build a community hub, which included a community recreational center and gymnasium with the City of Ottawa, affordable housing, and a daycare and community health center. The chapel wing repurpose had several issues for CADCO, one of which being the wing was too narrow for conversion into residential uses. The Parks and Rec Department confirmed they could not convert the chapel into a full regularization size gym for the city. They also expressed concerns with other potential uses above the gymnasium. Both groups had additional concerns of the wing's 1950s construction, specifically to the structural integrity and to bring the building up to current building code standards. Parks and Rec and Regional had an agreement in principle that there was merit to complete the demolition of the chapel wing and complete a land swap to the north of the Deschâtelet for a standalone gymnasium, which would link to the existing Deschâtelet building. This entire project fell through as CADCO could not secure the necessary funding to move forward. Therefore, Regional continued to explore other uses. Could the building be residential, commercial, live-work concepts? We continue to have the same issues with the chapel wing experienced by previous potential purchasers. Finally, in 2019, CECCE and the Regional Group entered into a conditional purchase and sales agreement for the CECE to purchase the Deschâtelet building, finalize negotiations with the City Parks and Rec Department, and to build a full-size gymnasium and a community center and demolish the chapel wing. The school board, prior to entering into the APS, determined they would not require the chapel space for programming for the school, nor could they find any other suitable uses to repurpose the chapel wing. The proposed plan for the Deschâtelet is that the ground floor would be split half for the community center and the other half for a school, about just shy of 4,000 square feet for each. The second and third floor would be the exclusive use of the school, and the fourth and fifth floor would be potential affordable housing. It's our opinion that the current proposed plan for the Deschâtelet is a true partnership with the CECCE, City Parks and Rec, and the potential for future affordable housing. The demolition application before you today, if approved, will allow Regional to finalize our conditional purchase and sales agreement with the CECE and finalize the negotiations with the city for the community center and full-size gym. We agree with the staff report and ask you to approve our application. Thank you.
Thank you for your delegation, and I see that Councillor Menard has questions.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks very much, Kelly. Good to see you for coming today. I just have a few questions for you about where things stand with le Conseil d'école catholique de Centris.
Your French much better than mine.
I'm still learning, but if for some reason the sale with CECCE doesn't go through, what is your view of what would occur? What would happen? I mean, how many more years would we be looking at until some other potential option came forward for this building?
Well, we actually have Luc Poulain here from the CECE who could speak specifically, but we have been working for the last 5 years trying to find an appropriate use that works within the community. We are very hopeful that this deal will close and we won't have to be in that position. If we are in that position, in that unfortunate position, I think it would probably take another 2 to 5 years to find an appropriate a use or tenant to put in the building.
Okay, and my understanding is the sale agreement is still conditional, and this is one of the clauses. Is that correct? And when do you? Sorry.
No, go ahead. That's correct.
And then when do you foresee if this moves forward? When do you foresee that becoming a binding agreement in terms of the sale to the school board and the community adaptive reuse of the building?
Sure. So this is the problem we've always had with this application, is because there's so many moving pieces, and we were working with Sally Coots before she retired, and now with Anne, and trying to understand. And it's always the comment comes up as the chicken and the egg, right? So we're dealing with Parks and Rec, we're dealing with planning, and we're also dealing with heritage. So trying to manage all three pieces has been really challenging. We also have to sever the property as well too. So we have to file to Committee of Adjustment for severance. It was recommendation by Doug James and senior staff that we went through the heritage permit and the change of use for the zoning for the school board first before we filed that application. So as most of you must know, the severance application takes 2 to 3 months. We're prepared to file it. We're hoping to file it next week. And so that application has to go through and be completed before we can physically sell the property to the school board. We're hopeful they'll be able to close before the end of this fiscal year, but it will all depend on all the timing.
Okay, that's helpful. And then your plans, Regional's plans for behind the Deschâtelet, the space between the Deschâtelet building and the river, is it to develop there? What are the plans for that? The space where the chapel wing occupies some of it, but not all of that space. What are the plans there?
For sure. So our plans back there have been in evolution for the last 5 or 6 years. We're currently working on a concept plan right now for some residential buildings that will go back in there, but we're not far enough along yet to meet with the community. We actually met with the community on site, community association last week, and did a tour of the site and gave them some more details of what we were doing. And our hopes is we'll be able to come out to you, councillor, and the community in late October, early November with our updated concepts.
Yeah, no, I heard about that tour. I appreciate you folks holding that as well. Sorry, did you want to finish?
No, just that I think and you and I know this, but just so everybody else on the call knows it, that our understanding is that the zoning will meet the height requirements of the existing zoning in those lands behind the Deschâtelet.
Thanks for that. And are you still planning on providing the land to the north of the building to the city as was originally envisioned? How is that working with this deal now in place, or potentially?
For sure. So that's one of the conditions in our deal with the CECCE, is that they were to, between the three of us, including the city, continue the negotiations on the lands to the north. It's always been our plan to complete that with the city. I believe Kevin Weary is on the line today, and he has been working with us as well as the CEC to finalize those plans. And my understanding is that a recommendation is going to FEDCO in October.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Appreciate you being here, Kelly.
Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Menard. And I see that Member McKinney has their hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Kelly, for the presentation and for the additional information. I wanted to ask some questions around the affordable housing. This is part of the entire project that has left me, questioning once again just how serious the city, our partners, stakeholders are in terms of providing affordability. I've been through the entire project, and I have to say it's impressive, but it's not mixed income. And I know that the affordable housing portion has been, it's been described as a potential use. It's been deferred. That would lead me to believe that it likely won't happen. But before my support is sought on this, either today or at council, I want to know, does the Education Act actually allow the board, the CECCE board, to have affordable housing as a permissible use? Like, what is that? Are they allowed to go through an RFP process? What does the Education Act what does it allow the school board to actually do? And that might be a question to the school board, but between now and planning and now in council, I'd really like to see this in writing from the ministry, from the board, so that I have an understanding of what actually can happen, because I think that everybody has good intentions, but if it can't be done, I want that put up front. If it can be done, I want that put in writing so that we know going forward that we can actually ensure there will be some small amount of affordability in this this new planned community.
So I understand your question. I will loop up with the CECE to get a proper response for you, Councillor. It's my understanding they have so the idea is we'd sell the whole building to the school board, and that they're the ones that are negotiating with, they've been working with OCH. And I don't know process-wise, Councillor King, how this works, but I know Luke can answer that specifically, as I am not comfortable answering on the Education Act. But my understanding is that it is possible, and that is what they're working towards.
And Luke is available for questions, but what I think I'll do is I know that there are members who will be speaking or deputants who will be speaking or available for questions, so maybe we'll defer that for just a little bit later in terms of process, but we will come back to that and get a answer from the school board. So thank you.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. And like I say, going forward, I really would like to see something very substantive in writing, so that I understand as we move forward on this entire project, what can be done, what can't, and how we can expect it to unfold. I just don't want any surprises in 6 months or a year or several years from now. So I appreciate that you can't answer it right now.
Okay. No, but we'll work as a team to get a proper clarity on that and to your questions before Thursday.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay.
And thank you. And I know that Member Podolsky has a question as well.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair King. Hi, Kelly. It's been a while since we've seen.
Yes.
I've read the reports and I've heard your presentation now and the discussion about the memorandum of understanding between the school board and regional. One thing which is unclear to me, and maybe you could help educate me on this, is that I understand that the school board did not want to acquire the chapel wing, and I can understand that. And my question is, was it a condition of the offer to purchase that the chapel wing must be demolished? Was that a condition that the school board provided?
Yes.
And did they give you a rationale as to why they would want the wing to be demolished before they acquired the main part of the building? Sorry, did you hear my question?
I think I did. My internet is being a bit shoddy. This COVID world is challenging, I'm sure, for everybody.
Sorry.
Your question,
I'll repeat it again.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I'll repeat it again. In the offer to purchase, the conditional offer that you have, I'd asked whether or not it was a condition of the purchase that regional demolish the chapel wing. And if so, what was the rationale that the school board had to require the demolition of the wing before they closed on the purchase?
So it was one of their conditions to closing. I can't speak to their intentions of why. I do know that we spoke about it in length because we wanted to see it. They didn't feel they could repurpose the chapel wing for their uses for their programming. And they had concerns about the width of the residential units above as well too. So it was a combined issue.
So that the 2 floors above the school, they would purchase it. Is that correct? They would purchase it, but they have concerns about the use of it as well. And I guess that relates a little bit to Catherine McKenney's question relating to the school board's authority to be able to rent out space or sell space above their school. It's unclear from the presentations what the school board's position of it is, because naturally one might even ask, will they be requesting regional to take over the upper 2 floors or to demolish the upper 2 floors because they can't use that space? So this is all very unclear to me, and I was hoping that we'd be able to cast a little bit of light on that.
Okay, so I think maybe we've misunderstood. So for the chapel wing specifically, the school board advised that they couldn't reuse that space for programming purposes. They had concerns about, with the partners that they were speaking with, about the size of the 2 floors above the chapel to repurpose into residential uses. So that's separate from the actual Châtelet building itself. And they are in negotiation with OCH as it stands right now for the top 2 floors to be used and repurposed as residential affordable housing. And my understanding is there is no issue or concern with that, but I will have to defer to the school board to provide you clarity on that.
Okay, thank you very much.
And thank you. So seeing no other questions, thank you for your deputation, much appreciated. The next speaker is Gord Laurier of Harbin Architects.
Good morning. There are slides, thank you. Yeah, it's Gord Laurier, actually, of Harbin Architecture. And I realize that this is a very unusual application. We're proposing a 2-stage heritage process that begins with the demolition of a heritage asset, which is the chapel. It's also an incredible opportunity to create a unique community hub, combining a Catholic school, a community center, and affordable housing. This concept is a natural extension, I think, of the historical use of the site, which has been a community asset since its beginning. But the whole issue regarding the chapel wing is fundamentally driven by risk, and that's the story behind it. Right in front of you now, you see the Greystone master plan. This is an earlier version of it, and I will show you a newer version later. But the whole organizing principle of this master plan, which was begun back in 2014 when Regional acquired the site, was the central organizing principle was the Châtelet building, which is the orange piece you see in the center. The semicircular forecourt immediately to the west of it, and the alley which leads out in east-west direction to Main Street. That is the central piece to all of this. That it is the whole design rests on that retention of those pieces. The development of this master plan was a very collaborative process that involved not only regional developments and the architects and engineers, but also the community and the city itself. And so there were a lot of aspects that I can't go into here, but the central notion was the retention of these elements as the main features of the site, and not only as an asset to Greystone itself, but an asset to the community, creating all kinds of linkages through the site and to the river itself, to the various pieces of the community that abutted it as well. And the forecourt plaza, which you see there is that semicircular area, was seen as an outdoor living room to the community. Kelly has talked at length, I guess, about, sorry, before we do that, go on to the next slide. So this is the current master plan, which shows different orientation. It's been flipped around, shows the Châtelet building at the center, the forecourt, which is going to be converted to a city park, the Grand Allée, which is the access that goes from Main Street up to the Châtelet building, is also going to be a city park. Both of those pieces are turning over to the city. It also shows the proposed, what we're talking about today, the proposed conversion of the Châtelet building to a school, community center, and affordable housing, with a proposed gym on the north side of the building and it's a full-size gym, which would be connected to the building with a small outdoor parking space that would serve the community center. And then it shows the other aspects of the development, much of which has already been built, except for phase 3. Kelly has talked a little bit about the history of the adaptive reuse that Regional has tried to develop along the way. She talked about how originally the idea on the original first master plans that we showed of converting the Deschâtelet building into a retirement home. That was unsuccessful. Then there was the social housing concepts with CCOC, which were ultimately unsuccessful. And so today, since 2019, we've been working with the Catholic School Board on the idea of this community hub, the combination of a community center, school, and affordable housing. In all of these instances, in all of the people that were talked to along the way with these different ideas, the risk associated with converting the chapel wing was a major issue. And maybe what we should do now is flip to the next slide. So here in this drawing, we see 3 sections. The section at the bottom is a longitudinal section running north-south through the main body of the building, of the part to be retained. And this larger section of the building is somewhat like a stack of egg crates. It's a system of load-bearing walls, of a corridor that runs north-south, and rooms that flank on either side, like an egg crate, stacked on top of each other. Very conventional construction and easy to modify and to work with. The section in the upper right is the section through the existing chapel wing. The red circle or oval covers the area of the addition. The part to the left of it is the main body of the building. And you can see that it has multiple levels, that the levels are inconsistent. There's been some confusion as to how many levels there are to the building, because at the east end of the wing, there are a series of rooms which don't align with other floor levels that are stacked on top of each other. But the main chapel area is in the center. It's a 2-story volume with these smaller spaces, the residential spaces on the top 2 floors. The structural issue that's related, that comes about with this wing, is not that the building is capable of holding itself up. If it's continued to be used as it is today, as for the purpose that it is today, there probably is no significant structural issue. Where the issue comes into play is the change of use. By the building code, the existing building is a residential building. It's considered a residential use, where the chapel was part of that residential use. And maybe not a good analogy, but the chapel is like an oversized living room in this large communal living facility. And when we look at converting it to another use, we go from a residential occupancy into an assembly occupancy. The building code imposes significant structural provisions. And so we unleash all these doors relating to seismic, loading, and the issue is we don't really have a clear picture of what that structure is about. So every candidate who has looked at this building and looked at this wing looks at the risk associated with the conversion of the chapel wing to another use as being a high risk. And it could be retained as the existing use, but what do you use at that residential space of the chapel wing as? You can carve it up into smaller rooms, into apartments that are 2-story spaces that occupy that central area. You introduce new loads. And so the structural issue reoccurs again. So that creates all these issues. There's multiple levels, narrow upper 2 floors where it's essentially bedrooms on either side of a corridor. The volume space in the center is very hard to adapt. There's very few cross walls to offer shear support in the conversion to a new use, and generally an uncertain structural design. I'd Next slide, please. So the current concept, and this drawing shows the concept of the very preliminary of the conversion of the Deschâtelet building. It's a view from the west, the northwest. To the right, to the left, you can see a block massing of the proposed gym that would go with the community center, and a link that would join the two arms, the new and the old, together. The whole strategy is built on a sequence of events. Approval of the demolition of the chapel wing gives the school board confidence that this use can go forward, and then we can develop a design and get further into this design and come back to Built Heritage to get approval of that design and the modifications we do to the building. That gives them confidence to move forward. That gives the Parks and Recreation confidence that there is a partnership with the school board, and so the community center can also move forward. It gives
1 minute left.
I'm almost done. That gives confidence to housing agencies such as OCH to develop a plan for the conversion of the upper two floors to affordable housing. We believe that the community benefit of this conversion, of providing these community assets to continuing the history of a Catholic presence on this site that has been here for 150 years, outweighs and justifies the loss of this wing.
Thank you, Mr. Lorimer. Much appreciated. We do have a question from Councillor Menard.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thanks, Mr. Lorimer, for that. One issue that's been raised in the community is around the consistent walkthrough from the entrance on Main Street through the tree-lined areas up to Deschâtelet, through the middle of Deschâtelet, and then accessing the back area where the river is. Is there still a plan right now to open that center area up? Is that part of the design discussions that are going on in terms of a path that would lead back there to open that middle section up?
So that was an idea that was developed earlier on in the master plan, and it would be as a public path that would go on through. The school board is a bit concerned about that idea from a liability point of view with children. That would also become the main entrance to the building for school children. So the idea of a path that cuts through is still there, but whether it's a public path is less likely to occur. Although that would still be part of what we're developing as the design proceeds.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that. And I see that we do have a question from Vice Chair Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for that presentation, Mr. Lorimer. My question pertains to the future use of the area behind the Deschâtelet building. You had a couple of in your two renderings. There are a couple of different sort of options. I'm just wondering if there was ever any consideration of if this demolition were to proceed, of having the recreational community facilities developed in and around that space, as opposed to the north of the building.
Actually, one of the earlier schemes that we did when we were working with CCOC in the previous 2016 version of this idea, that was actually where the gym was going to go. And the idea was that the gym would occupy the lower two levels, much as where the cafeteria and the chapel are now. And then there would be housing built on top of it. The Parks and Recreation people were not keen on that because of the idea of putting housing, which is noise sensitive, above a large assembly space where there would be noise and active uses going on into the evening. So the two uses together seem to be a bit of a contradiction or a conflict. The other aspect was right from the very beginning, Scholastic, which is the new street that runs next between the Des Châtelets and the river, was seen as being a Warnouf with very little traffic on it, to be oriented to being both for cycling and pedestrians, minimize car traffic on that street. The community center, the Parks and Recreation wanted the community center to be really accessible to the community and be able to have vehicle access to it. And so putting it on the north side gave it street frontage on a two-way street where there'd be easier access to it, easier to have a parking area where visitors could be.
Okay, thank you for that. One quick follow-up. Your colleague, Kelly, mentioned that currently the plan is residential development there. I'm just wondering, in terms of that space, how is it zoned right now? What would be the implications there?
Well, we're not involved in that part of the development. That Kelly should probably speak to that herself. That'd be a better question to her. But the zoning does permit residential uses in here already, so I don't think there's any conflict with that, based on my understanding.
Are there height restrictions?
The height restriction, as I recall, is it can't be higher than there is a height restriction put in place. Basically, the idea is it cannot be higher than the Des Châtelets building, so that you can't see. The idea was to give the Des Châtelets building primacy in the view from Main Street looking east, so that there wouldn't be towers sticking up behind it.
That answers my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Quinn. And we have one additional hand up. That's Member Halsall.
Thank you. I just wanted to bring up one of the concerns that had been flagged by Heritage Ottawa earlier. Gord, when you were giving your rundown of the various architectural nuances and quirks of the building, you'd identified a number of areas that would make adaptive reuse either as residential or as some other institutional or commercial use difficult. But in your eyes, are these challenges with the different floor levels and the awkward subdivisions of the interior spaces, are they over and above what one would normally expect in a heritage building? Or would, in your eyes, this be consistent for what you would expect to see when doing any kind of adaptive reuse process within a heritage building like this?
It's a difficult question to answer, but because every heritage building is different. But just look at the rest of the building. So if I look at the north-south wing, the main body of the Des Châtelets building, which is 5 levels, they have different floor heights, but they're very consistent. There's a floor and there's a corridor with load-bearing walls on either side of this wide corridor. The spaces on either side are generous and broken into rooms. So it's a system of columns and load-bearing walls. And I mean, Rick Cunliffe can speak to the structure a little better than I can, but it is relatively easy to adapt that, because that system to a new use, because the system is already in place of a system of structural system is already in place that anticipates different changes. The problem with the chapel wing, it is unusual. You know, there are lots of examples of other buildings like that being converted to different uses, but it is a challenge, and there are a lot of risks associated with it. This building, the combination of the soils, which are sensitive, the age of the building, the structural system, which is unknown, and the seismic issues associated with Ottawa could make that, I guess what I'm trying to say is it's a high risk. There are so many unknowns we don't really know. And the other aspect to it is the loading of apartments on top of this volume space, as opposed to within the volume space or under the volume space.
Okay, thank you. I suppose what I was getting at was whether this is, even within an Ottawa context, you've mentioned there's lots of other examples of successful adaptive reuse projects in spaces like this. Are these unknowns that present the risk within this project unknowns that in your eyes could become knowns, could be resolved with further study? You know, are these easily mitigated?
They're not easily mitigated. And we have examples in our, even as recently as last year, of heritage buildings when they become difficult or challenging to adapt, they sit and become idle and wait. And then we had the example of the partial collapse of a building on in the Hindenburg area a year or two ago. We have the Daly building that sat around waiting for decades while we tried to find a new use and wrestle with the structural issues and adaptive reuse issues that are associated with it. So sometimes they fly and sometimes they don't. But the more challenging it is, the more risk that there is, the fewer people there are willing to take the risk. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, but it just becomes more difficult.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Laurier, for your presentation. There are no other questions, so we'll move on with the registered speakers on the list. And the next speaker is John Stewart of Commonwealth Historic Resource Management.
Good morning. Sorry about that. I'm getting organized here. I appreciate the opportunity. I've prepared the CHIS for this phase of the project. This is it's been an interesting again process, I guess you'd say. The original CHIS was prepared in 2015, and since then as work progresses, we've added 8 separate addendum to the original document to explain and to assess the impacts as the project goes along. A central organizing principle of Greystone Village Master Plan is the preservation of the de Châtelet building as a community asset, as one of the principal components of the cultural heritage landscape. A number of agencies, including the City of Ottawa's official plan, identify a cultural heritage landscape as a means of defining distinct areas of heritage significance which have modified by human activities and are valued by a community. It involves a grouping of individual heritage features such as structures, spaces, archaeological sites, and natural elements, which together form a significant type of heritage form, distinct from that of its constituent elements or parts. The Oblate property is a good example of a design cultural heritage landscape with a tradition of evolving. As records indicate, the de Châtelet building has undergone a number of alterations and changes in response to the needs of the Oblate community. These changes are a character-defining feature of the cultural landscape and speak to the building's capacity to evolve and the property's capacity where evolution is dictated by programming needs. The de Châtelet building is comprised of 4 amalgamated structures. The purple is the original building. The pink on either end are the north and south wings that were constructed in 1925. And then the chapel wing is in green. Could I go to the next slide, please? The figure 1, it chronicles some of the major changes. The original main building was a 4-story structure constructed in 1885 with the tower added in 1887. Next slide, please. In 1925, the building was extended with the addition of 4-story north and south wings. And the next slide, please. In 1950, the building was further altered with the addition of a 5th story, which you can see as part of the body of the main building. At the same time, major renovation was carried out with the construction of the 5-story chapel wing. Go to the next slide, please. The construction of the wing was undertaken in-house using the members of the order as the construction crew. Sort of an interesting element of this, and I think it's some of the questions about determining its capacity to be modified are raised by the fact that it was a volunteer group that built the chapel. The entire building underwent extensive interior renovations in 1967 and 68. Historically, the building evolved and changed radically and organically. The demolition of the chapel wing is a continuation of that tradition, where architecture as a principal component of the cultural landscape responds to programming changes. The proposed 21st century introduction of residential mixed use throughout the property has transformed the overall property with the De Châtelet building a focus of that transformation. There is an agreement to purchase the De Châtelet building with the objective of converting it to an elementary school, in tandem with the potential of the City of Ottawa's Parks and Recreation building a municipal community center. These uses, along with the introduction of residential mixed use throughout the property, are very fitting and will round out the sense of community and reinforce Greystone Village as an evolving cultural heritage landscape. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Stewart. I don't see any questions for you from members, so we'll move on with our registered list. As promised, we do have deputants who are available based on requests for questions. That includes Rick Cunliffe of Cunliffe and Associates, Doug Van Derham of Harbin Architects, and also members from the French Catholic School Board, Luc Paulin and Marc Bertrand. So I don't know if we want to obviously address some of the previous questions that were posed to the school board, especially around questions around the Education Act and requests around written requests, and also issues around the potential of affordable housing on floors in proximity to the school. So I am obviously willing to have members repose those questions, or if those questions were noted for the representative from the school board to provide comment. And we do have member Podolsky who's put up his hand, so please.
Thank you, Chair King. I think that the questions that were posed by Councillor McKinney and myself relating to the school board's position in coming to this offer with what we understand is a condition that the chapel wing be demolished. I think that if the representative of the school board could be made available to answer Councillor McKinney's question and my question, that would be quite helpful in guiding us towards the staff recommendation.
Excellent, and I'll invite the member of the representatives for school board to provide comment.
So thank you, Mr. Chair. If I may present myself, I'm Luc Poulin. I'm Director of Facilities here at the French Catholic School Board in Ottawa. So I won't do a presentation, but just voice some information and respond to at least two questions that were asked. Just prior to that, the Hotel d'Ottawa is one of our top priority projects within the City of Ottawa, and has been for the past 2 years. We are very anxious to proceed. So one of the response or the question asked by Councillor McKinney, it was regarding to the Ministry of Education or the Act. There's no such regulation regarding residential use or other use. There is, although, guidelines from the Ministry of Education given in March 2015, which are up to date, and we can provide that information to that effect. The Ministry of Education doesn't regulate or does not dictate or approve which partnerships are suitable or not. It's up to the school board to proceed with the facility partnership. And actually, Ministry of Education does encourage school board to, when they have excessive capacity or space, to rent out to and facilitate partnerships. And the school board, the CCC, has had many circumstances where partnerships were made in the past, especially for sports related at some point, but also uses like radio stations, like in one of our schools on MacArthur. As for the question asked by Mr. Podlowski, the reason for demolition, I'm just going to correct that it wasn't upon a request from the school board to have it part of our agreement to purchase and sell, but just that to the effect that we're supporting regional, because we cannot convert or render the space accessible, actually the chapel itself and the above floors. And there was some concerns regarding separation and security aspects. So the school board did not deem appropriate to include this space within our agreement of purchase and sale. As for another question asked by Councillor Menard, yes, the see-through or passageway was think about, but there are actually security issues that we are concerned. It's one of the many boards have a concern regarding security. So passage of citizens through our school or access is very difficult. So usually what we do is we have security aspects and we don't allow passage through. So I hope I responded to all the questions.
And I think there might be one additional question from member Podolsky, and I see some more questions actually coming in for you. Okay, so we'll start with Barry first.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Poulin, for elaborating on the school board's position. I think it's a very exciting opportunity to introduce a school into a heritage building like this. I just wanted to follow through on the question of the chapel wing itself. For the functioning of the school, if it is not usable, and I can understand that it wouldn't be usable by the school board, but if the wing was completely severed, that is not demolished, but severed, and regional put some other use to it, would that be an inhibition to the introduction of the school together with partnering with the community center in the main part of the building? Because I noticed that there is still 2 floors above the school that would be for some other kind of use. And as you may know, I was the architect for the development of Centre de Jour Gig in Lower Town, which became a mixed-use community center and condominium building. And the issue of the stacked upper floors being residential and the community center on the lower 2 levels was resolved, but it was quite complex to do that And it would have been a lot easier had the residential use there, instead of being on top of the community center, actually been a separate wing, like the like the chapel wing that we have here. So my question to you is that if the chapel wing was not demolished, but it was repurposed for some other use by regional or another partner, would that really prevent the introduction of a welcome school in this building?
Okay, so just before I answer that question regarding the chapel, just the top 2 floors, yes, we had a discussion with OCH. We're currently in the works of working out some kind of a LOU or MOI regarding the use of those top 2 floors, or we're very keen on partnering up with OCH. As for the chapel itself, we haven't gone through the aspect of if it was severed from the actual building. My only concern as an engineer myself is just the structural aspect, and when you're integrated into one building, our insurance provider, which is OSB, which is the Ontario School Board insurance, would probably request some certainty regarding who owns that part and whatever is going to be made within that portion of the building itself. So that would be my only concern regarding that chapel. So no, we haven't taken that off our plate. If there were ever a severed part of the chapel itself, if we can make that feasible.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I saw that there is a question from, or maybe potentially a number of questions from Vice Chair Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, my question was similar to my colleague Barry's about whether or not the school board would be prepared to proceed with the project if the wing was severed and to remain in the regional group's ownership. So thank you. That answered my question.
Thank you. And we have a question from Councillor Menard.
Thanks very much, Chair. Hi, Mr. Poulin. Thanks for being here. I just wanted to ask about a couple of items. Are there any other items in the conditional sale agreement related to heritage aspects of the Des Châtelets, or is this the only one?
Well, we're just finalizing our due diligence, and there's only 2 more conditions, but nothing related to the heritage part.
Okay, thanks for that. That's helpful. And my understanding is there would be a daycare space at the outdoor space at the back of the building. If you can confirm that that's in the plans.
Yes, that's required through the bylaws, Ministry of Education also, that covers the childcare programs, that their space can be required in the back of the building.
Okay, and just so I'm clear, where would your land stop behind the building? Is it directly abutting the Des Châtelets building, or is there further room there for play of students outdoors? Because I know there's going to be the front park, but students need to go outdoors and play. So is it that they would be having space where the current chapel wing is, some space there, or is that not yet decided? What is the thinking around that?
So the use for the child play area, so our purchase and the sales agreement only has a 3 meter around the building, except for the part where the child care is going to be at. We're going to meet the requirements for the minimum space required for the number of places within that the child care. As for the other play area, The intent of the school board is to use community parks around within that vicinity, and to enter into an agreement with the city of Ottawa regarding a forecourt, probably, but not have it deemed exclusive use, but use many of the parks within the area. So there's no intent to purchase any parcel of land in excess to meet the child play area.
Okay, just, I mean, and that's helpful. I mean, with 350 kids thereabouts, you know, I've seen different numbers of students, but I think, you know, probably you can anticipate 350 at some point. It would be nice to be able to think about where they're going to play outside. And it may be that behind the Deschâtelet building, in that area where the current chapel is, could, you know, produce a spot for those children to play as well. And so I hopefully we can talk some more about that. I appreciate the answers. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. And I don't see hands up for any additional questions to Mr. Cunliffe, to Mr. Van Den Ham, and to Monsieur Poulin and Monsieur Bertrand. So if there are no other questions of these deputants, then we will move on to Ron Rose of the Old Ottawa East Community Association.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Good morning to you and to members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to this agenda item. I'm speaking on behalf of the Old Ottawa East Community Association. I'm currently the interim chair of the planning committee of the Community Association. As a number of people have mentioned, the Deschâtelet building is the heart of the central precinct of Old Ottawa East. It was built before the original village was incorporated and features prominently in many of the early pictures of the community. When our community design plan was developed 10 to 15 years ago, a separate section of the plan, Section 3.5, was included to stress the need to protect the Deschâtelet building, the Grand Allée leading to the building, and its associated lands. A number of people in the community firmly believe that the chapel wing should be saved, that its structural integrity is still open for debate, and that the owners knew they were buying a heritage building and should pay whatever it costs to maintain that asset. On the other hand, the community of Old Ottawa East is currently underserved for community services. The French language school is living on a year-to-year lease in a temporary quarters. The existing community center, the Old Town former town hall, was built at the beginning of the 1900s and is totally inadequate. As an example of its inadequacy, there is only one room that has a seating capacity of 45 to 50 people in pre-COVID times, or 8 people today, that is wheelchair accessible. So we are woefully inadequate for just space. And there is a lack of affordable housing within Old Ottawa East. The community believes that the benefits that have been proposed, should the sale proceed to the Conseil des Écoles Catholiques du Centre-Est, those being the new gym and community center, a permanent school for the CICCE, and the possibility of affordable housing outweigh the loss of the chapel wing, but only if the proposed benefits materialize. Therefore, the Community Association passed the following motion at a special meeting in May of 2020. The motion read, Having considered the proposed benefits to the community resulting from the conditional sale of the Deschâtelet building, the Community Association does not support the proposed demolition of the chapel wing unless the sale of the building to the CECCE is completed and the City of Ottawa commits to the timely construction of a community center in the Deschâtelet building and an adjoining gymnasium multi-purpose facility. I would like to remind members of the subcommittee that our position is consistent with that of the Community Activities Group of Old Ottawa East, which also supports this trade-off. Mr. Chairman, as you can see from the motion, the community can only agree to the demolition of the chapel wing if those community benefits, particularly the community center, will follow. We recognize that your subcommittee cannot give the guarantees we seek, but it is an inconvenient fact that your committee's approval of this demolition is necessary if we are to make any progress toward achieving those benefits. Therefore, we support the subcommittee's approval of the demolition as proposed. Thank you very much for your attention and consideration, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Rose, for your presentation. And we do have a question for you from Councillor Menard.
Thanks very much, Chair King, and thanks, Ron, for being here. And I support your position that I know you've debated and gone through, and there's a number of caveats that are included in there. And I want to make sure that those caveats, when they go to Planning Committee, have teeth, that they're strong, and that we're not just seeing a demolition occur without the other pieces there that involve the adaptive reuse of this building. So I'm not sure, Ron, have you seen the holding symbol that staff have drawn up with regard to how the signing of an agreement would occur with the city in terms of its use as a school or community use, and the submission of an application for a building permit related to remediation for either a school or a community use?
No, Ms. Councillor, I am aware of reference to that holding symbol. It's been drawn to my attention, but I don't really understand what it means.
Okay, I just want to let you know I'll be speaking today to staff and giving direction about working together towards Planning Committee to make sure that the community is aware of what that means, and if there's any needed amendments to that, to make sure we have the teeth that you've outlined in your motion secured before this moves forward, and also with regard to the heritage attributes of the chapel and affordable housing. So I appreciate you being here.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I believe I had 30 seconds left over. Would it be appropriate to make a comment about the consultation that had taken place with the community? It was raised in an earlier
I think
question.
that's atypical, but I'm actually willing to allow it if the other fellow members of this subcommittee are open to it. I'm assuming they are.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. The question was raised earlier as to what consultation had taken place with the community. There was a plan to address the community association at our May meeting in 2020. That meeting, unfortunately, was canceled because of the COVID situation. So while there were efforts to communicate with the committee, there was not a broad discussion with the community because of the COVID situation. Thank you.
Appreciate that, Mr. Rose, and thank you for your presentation. The next person registered on our speaking list is Mr. Fleming from Heritage Ottawa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Heritage Ottawa was pleased to have the opportunity, Heritage Ottawa is pleased to have the opportunity to comment on staff recommendation for the Deschâtelet building at 175 Main Street, a property designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. We strongly supported the designation of this property in 2013 and were pleased 2 years later when the new owner, Regional Group, purchased the entire Oblates property and made a commitment to preserve the heritage designated building. Over the past 5 years, Regional Group has benefited greatly from the opportunity to undertake an extensive development of low-rise as well as the construction of an 8-story retirement home, while seeking to sell the heritage property to an owner that would to preserve this significant example of Ottawa's built heritage. We were pleased when the CECCE expressed an interest in adapting the building for use as a school. Such use would not only preserve its heritage attributes, but would be in keeping with the property's statement of cultural heritage value. We were disappointed, however, that a condition of such use seemed to be the removal of the 1950s addition, which housed the former chapel, which had been specifically protected as part of the designation. We are even more disappointed that city staff are supporting the application of Regional Group and the CECCE to demolish the significant portion of the heritage property. After a careful reading of the documentation associated with the application, we are not convinced that the city have made a persuasive argument to justify the demolition of the chapel wing. The fact that it might be expensive to repair is not in itself. It appears that the rest of the building will also require much needed remediation and preservation. If the school has no requirements for the chapel wing at this time, why not stabilize it while the city further considers its options, or the current owner tries to find another partner to enable them to live up to their commitment to preserve the building made over 5 years ago. The chapel wing is essentially structurally sound, and although its preservation may be costly, the repairs and reconfiguration for an adaptive use would probably not exceed the total cost of its demolition and the construction of a new building, either for use by the new owner or the City of Ottawa. The fact that the new owner apparently has no use for this part of the building is not in itself a reason to seek its demolition, nor is the City of Ottawa Recreation, Cultural and Facility Services determination, quote, that the chapel wing was not adequate for a community center that includes a gymnasium, unquote. Surely, as the city begins to reconsider its operational capabilities and demands in a post-COVID-19 world and its long-term effect on how the city provides services to its citizens, to demolish a structure that may potentially provide a much-needed civic use could be considered short-sighted. We feel that the statement of the latest August 2020 iteration of the Cultural Heritage Impact Statement, which notes that such a demolition is merely another example of how the property has, quote, been construction, unquote, is more an excuse for demolition rather than a valid statement about heritage. What is more significant to a former religious institution than its chapel? All previous modifications were in service of the Oblates themselves and is a physical record of their continuous use and evolution, while this demolition would be an erasure of that history solely to accommodate a new use. Finally, the preservation of the chapel wing should not be considered a deal breaker to the imaginative and appropriate adaptive reuse of the rest of the building. Instead, it offers a challenge to the current owner, who has already benefited greatly by the development of the former Oblates property, and the city to find a similar appropriate use for this important example of Ottawa's built heritage. We therefore urge the subcommittee not to support the report recommendations, which would permit the demolition of this chapel wing. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Fleming. And I'm just surveying to see if there are any questions, and I do not see any questions for you. So we will move on to the last registered speakers, Tom and Joyce Scott.
Good morning.
Good morning.
You can hear me all right?
We can.
Oh, that's great. Okay, because I can only hear you over the phone. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for dealing with this little bit of tech limitation. I know that Councillor Brockington asked a question about, what the background of the intervener is, so I should get that out in front. My wife and I are 30-year residents of Old Ottawa East. We've been in Ottawa itself for 50 years, so we're very familiar with the site. It's a place that we can walk to quite regularly, and we certainly enjoy the view of the building, both from the front and the back when we walk along the river. I'm also a member of the Old Ottawa East Community Association executive. I'm the chair of the Transportation Committee. And I know that transportation isn't an issue with you today, but it will certainly be on Thursday. So that's another issue altogether. Nevertheless, we are still very much concerned that the motion of our community association is being read exclusively as one of support for demolition. But in fact, it reads in the reverse: demolition is not supported unless two other conditions are met beforehand. And those two conditions, I'll go into a little bit of detail from our perspective, as opposed to what we've heard some of the other professionals say. The sale of the building to the school board is conditional, and we still haven't heard or seen really clear indication the board has all its necessary authorities, including provincial, for placing a school in a mixed-use facility, local zoning notwithstanding, that would include both social housing residences and community activities. The school board is also quoted as saying it has no educational program use for the chapel wing, but that alone does not exactly ask for its demolition. Yet somehow that seems to have become a condition of sale. That same school board does not need the upper floors of the central block either, but those are not the subject of a demolition proposal. If, as Councillor McKenna noted, social housing space is a driving need, then the chapel wing itself could contribute to that and more compared to the central block itself. So we see that something is just not fitting here at this time. The second point that was raised was the details of a community center and an attached gym remain to be worked out. And as others have noted, the size of the offered site itself may be a limiting factor on how large a gym could be situated there. On our walkabout about a week ago, Tuesday evening, the representatives from EQ and regional were still not clear on exactly how much of the central part of Deschâtelet would be required by the school and how much could be allocated to community uses. They did, however, offer additional pre-planning consultations with the community early this fall, at which time these questions could be more fully resolved. So for both of these preconditions, we view that funding from other sources will be necessary. And as we can all appreciate in post-COVID-19 budgeting, both the province, the city, and all the school boards may have to adjust capital project schedules while debt and deficits are met and the operating budgets return to normal. There is a clear risk that the school repurposing project and the community center could be put on the back burner until cash flows of both levels of governments are stabilized. If federal infrastructure money is in the mix, then that adds a third level of complication and risk. And there could be a lot more rethinking of planning and design in the interim. For these reasons, we believe that the decision of the committee to consider a request for demolition should be delayed until the conditions set out by the Old Ottawa East Community Association can be more fully and clearly met. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Thank you for your presentation. I see one question from Councillor Menard.
Thanks very much, Councillor King, and Chair King and Mr. Scott. Thanks for being here. I just wanted to reiterate the points because you've been, sending lots of notes on this. I know you've engaged in depth on this as well. I want to reiterate the point to Mr. Rose that I made as well, that there's a need here to work with staff to make sure that the uses you're talking about and the conditions you're speaking about have more teeth. And so we will endeavor to do that prior to planning committee and at planning committee. So I appreciate you speaking with us. I just want to make sure you know that that's part of our plan and the go forward.
Yes, I was aware of the hold flag being proposed to be put on. That certainly is helpful, but I want to make it fairly clear that the community at large, and certainly the debate at the community association meeting, focused on the need for community space in the community, and certainly in Greystones would be preferred, but it's not the only option available to the community. There are other green spaces and open spaces in the community that could also be repurposed for a community center with a large gym. So this isn't the only site. It's a very convenient one. It's very useful. It's nice that Regional is offering this, but that's not an excuse for tearing down the chapel.
No, I appreciate that, and I do regret we're at this position as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. I see no other questions. Since Mr. Scott was the last registered speaker, we now move to the committee to ask if committee has any questions for staff. And I see member Conforti has put up her hand first.
Thank you, Chair King. Yeah, I did want to ask staff about the report. One thing that comes to mind, and Mr. Stewart touched on this as well in what he said today, was that this building is a series of additions and alterations. I find it really curious on page 9 of the staff report that the standards from the standards and guidelines for the preservation of, or the conservation of historic places in Canada that apply to this project don't call out standard number 2, which is to conserve changes to a historic place that over time have become character defining elements in their own right. The chapel addition clearly is a character defining element. It's called out on the heritage character statement. So I don't know, I don't know how we go about choosing the standards that apply to a specific application. It's not a menu. Like, I think standard 2 is a very obvious standard that applies to this application, and I don't know why it wasn't included. So that was my first question.
Through you, can everyone hear okay? Yeah, okay. Through you, Chair, thank you for the question. Staff review all the applicable standards and guidelines to see which apply. And in this case, I would put forward that standard 2 about the elements becoming important over time in their own right is being applied, because we've identified that as being the portion, the primary portion of the Deschâtelet building. So in the image I had up in my presentation, you saw the primary portion in 1885, additions in 1925, additions in 1950. So all of those additions have been recognized over time as being important in its own right. In terms of the chapel wing, the chapel itself is identified as a heritage attribute. The wing is not. So the wing is certainly designated as part of the Part 4 designation, but there's a distinction there. So we're recognizing that the chapel is significant and that the loss of the chapel itself is a negative impact. But in our opinion, it's balanced by finding a sustainable long-term use for the primary portion of the building. So I didn't include that condition in my report simply because I didn't think it would apply, but certainly we do review them, and I think it does meet that standard.
I do have a second question, Mr. Chair. In the staff presentation and in the delegations, we spoke a lot about, trying to find a use for the chapel. I'm curious as to what options were explored. So it's because it sounds like from our discussion today, it sounds like, well, the gym did not fit, so we can't, and there's no other use. I don't know. I look at that space and I have like 5 ideas that pop into mind. So I'm just curious as to what options and what sort of alternate uses were explored besides the gymnasium that obviously didn't fit because of the narrow configuration.
Through you, Chair, I don't know, I can answer the question, but maybe Kelly Rodenheiser from Regional Group would be better suited to speak to that in detail. But when we started to review the application, we asked for a request for all the different uses that had been considered since Regional had owned the property in 2015. And we spoke to some of them today, but that included a retirement home, a community hub with a healthcare center and daycare center, live work concepts, residential uses, and then what's in front of you today, which is the school use and the gymnasium. But I would ask maybe if Kelly had any additional uses I'm not mentioning here.
Yeah, I mean, and specific to the chapel space as well.
Yes, yeah, and sorry, just to be clear, those uses that that I'm just mentioning there were specific. Oh, specific to the chapel. Were specific to the chapel wing. Kelly, are you able to answer that in a bit more detail?
If that's okay with you, Chair, for me.
That is okay.
Oh, okay, great. So Anne mentioned them all, Amanda, that we have done. We spent a lot of time specifically on the chapel wing to try to find uses. So the city explored all of their options with Parks and Rec, gymnasium and other community uses, and they confirmed it didn't work for them. Another couple uses, we did look with the arts, seeing if we could get an arts or a live work program as well in there too, and that was not able to move forward. We also looked at commercial uses and office uses, and also just converting it into residential apartments as well too. And the real constraint came in what Gord and has already spoken about, is the repurposing of the chapel into those uses was very risky and very cost prohibitive. Is our understanding, because of the structural nature and the seismic requirements. And the other problem was to convert into residential. The chapel wing was very narrow, and it was a dormitory type process uses, and the floor to ceiling is very short as well too. So trying to get it to current building code standards and get it to a point where it could be used for apartments is very challenging.
Such as like a dining hall or an auditorium, were those considered? Because I see I see potential there for a retirement home to use that as the dining hall, for example, and the school could use that as their assembly hall. So there were specific uses for the actual chapel space considered, and sort of pros and cons, like were there options analysis and that sort of thing specific to that space, since it is a designated interior space.
For sure. So we, before my time at Regional, that we had several retirement residents look at purchasing the entire de Châtelet building with the chapel wing. And I think it was about 2 or 3 different groups that came through, all of which had real issues and concerns with repurposing the chapel itself, the space itself, as well as with the wing. And I'm sorry, I can't speak any further to that. Gord was on the file from the very beginning. He might have a little bit more insight on that because he did all the architectural drawings. And then we spent some time with the school board, and they advised that they didn't have any use for the chapel wing as well either. So I think that's all I can provide you at this time.
Thank you. And now I know we have member McKinney, who's also on the list to ask staff questions.
Thank you, Chair. I guess it's a 2-part question. Am I correct that that the applicant does not have to come back for site plan control? And if that is the case, how are we to be assured just how much community space is going to be allotted, given our decision today and moving forward with this application?
Through you, Chair, for the application that's in front of the committee today, which is the demolition of the chapel wing and the creation of the infill wall, there would be no requirement for a site plan approval associated with that specific application. There may be the requirement for site plan going forward for any further alterations to the building, but not for what's in front of the committee today. The zoning bylaw amendment for that's going forward is related to the addition of a school use specifically. The residential use and the community center use are already permitted under the zoning bylaw for this building. So there's no additional associated process with those two uses. Does that answer your question? Or we also have our colleagues from Development Review here who could speak to the site plan requirements maybe at future stages if necessary.
Yeah, if they could, I just want to, here's what I'm after. I want to understand, I know that Councillor Menard and the community are working going forward on the MOU to ensure a community center and the space and the uses for the community on this. Certainly, I think it's important also to know, what those space requirements and what we're going to be seeing turned over to the community. And I'm also, and I don't know, Chair, if you'd like me to give this direction now, but I do want to give a direction to staff. I do want it in writing before this comes back to planning and ultimately to council. I do want in writing the exact process for how we're going to ensure that we have affordable housing here. I want to ensure that the Education Act allows for housing as a permissible use. Talked about rentals and what that means, but I want to ensure that. I want to ensure that the RFP process is allowed through the Education Act. And I want some guarantee that this applicant is going to be working towards some substantive housing, affordable housing at this site. I think it's very important to the community, to the ward councillor, just what the final outcomes are going to be here if in fact we're going to allow for demolition. So that's my direction to staff, and then so I can give that now.
And I'll accept that as a formal direction to staff.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, if we have staff, planning staff who could respond to the site plan controls going forward, and at what process, at what points in the process would that come back to us?
Hi, Jean-Charles Renaud here from Planning Review. So Anne put it very well. There is no site plan control application in front of us at the moment. The zoning bylaw amendment that will be in front of the planning committee on the 10th. The main aspect of it would be to add the permitted use of a school into the zone. That in itself does not trigger the need for site plan control application for the conversion of the school itself. If at a later point there is an addition of other uses such as residential uses, then perhaps that might trigger, or that would very well trigger the need for site plan control or other types of planning approval applications at that moment.
Yeah. So does that include not just housing, but the community center use? Would that, at what point, I guess what I'm asking, what I want to know is, at what point do we know how much is being allotted for community use in this application? How much of the, the final site will have a community use? I think it's important. Is it going to be 5%, 10%, 20%, or do we not know? Are we going into this on a wing and a prayer? No pun intended.
As far as answering a question from timelines, I can't answer that question. I know Kevin Weary's on the line as well. I see his name there, so perhaps he can speak to it, but I can speak to the fact that whenever those decisions are made or when those timelines are known, then absolutely that part of the project will need to go through site plan control and perhaps further zoning relief or whatnot, but for sure site plan control once those timelines are known.
Okay, so I'm Chair. I'll leave it at that. Thank you to staff for that response. I'll leave it at that. I've given my direction. I know that Councillor Menard continues to work, especially going into planning committee to ensure that we have more detail around the MOU. I will await to get my response back. Today, I am going to vote in favor of the demolition today, but that could very well change come council if I don't have the guarantee that I need, that there will be a guarantee of affordable housing, not just the potential. I need a guarantee of affordability and affordable housing here before I will give my final approval at council. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McKinney. I see that we also have Member Pavelski who has questions for staff.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair King. This has to do with the approval process under the Ontario Heritage Act. And what I'm surprised by is the diversion from our common practice of requiring development proposal to be submitted with perhaps a demolition included in the proposal for adaptive reuse. So this is unusual. For example, in the Chateau Laurier proposal, the submission for an addition was submitted, and then there was an application for heritage approval of the demolition of the garage. In this case, we don't have any proposal for adaptive reuse of the main part of the De Châtelet building, and the questions that people have asked are trying to penetrate the fog of uncertainty about the reality of community use, whether it's a school combined with a community center combined with social housing. So my question to Anne is, did you not recommend to the developer that they actually submit an application for adaptive reuse, which includes the demolition, because that is the the prudence that we've always taken in the heritage policy, where you actually have a proposal in front which has been sufficiently hardened so that the trade-off between community benefits and the loss of a significant piece of the city's heritage can be balanced by this committee, planning committee, and council. So did you recommend to regional at any point that they ought to put in an application for adaptive reuse prior to a separate application for demolition?
Through you, Chair, I hope I'm understanding your question correctly, Member Podolsky, but I think the approach that's here is not really a departure from our standard practice. We have an application to alter a building, which includes the demolition of the chapel wing, and we have concurrently an application for adaptive reuse, which is headed to Planning Committee concurrently to this application. So we did try to tie it to the adaptive reuse application, and if I can ask Eric Pillow, if you're able to put up my presentation, maybe if I can, please. Oh, thanks, Eric. If I can just point out the condition that we have in the heritage report and the holding zone provision that will be in the zoning report, maybe that would be useful in showing how we have tried to connect the heritage alteration application to the adaptive reuse of the building.
Yes, I'm glad you're doing that as well, because I wanted you to put up that process diagram. I think it was one of your first slides that was unclear.
Sure, I would be happy to answer that as well. And then maybe just in terms of your comparison with the Chateau Laurier application, I think it would be similar to that, if I'm remembering correctly, in that the demolition of the parking lot building came first, and then subsequently there was an application for the addition to the Chateau Laurier at a later date. So I think it's actually quite similar to that. We're assessing the application for demolition at this date, and there would be future applications required for any other alterations to the building, including accessible, making entrances accessible rather, a gym. Thank you. Thanks, Eric. So if we can go down to,
it's a slide that shows the process.
Oh yeah, sure. We can start there. Sorry, Eric, if you're waiting for direction, it's, sorry, I have to open it on my screen here. That would be slide, what slide is it? 14. Yeah, so what was your question specifically about this slide, Member Podolsky?
Well, yes, this is actually appropriate. What we have here is that there appears to be a single heritage permit application, which is to demolish the chapel wing, but I don't see anything in the Heritage, under the Heritage Act, where there's a permit application for the adaptive reuse of the remaining part of the building. Where is that in this process?
Yeah, so those plans are not part of this application because they haven't been finalized, but we do have them included as part of, I referenced them in the staff report as requiring approval in the future, and they're in the cultural heritage impact statement of that was submitted as part of the application, illustrating conceptually what the future use may look like. So Eric, if I could ask you to go to slide number 24. Yeah, that would be helpful. So we have, it's not an application and it's not in front of the committee today, but there are illustrative concepts of what may happen with future adaptive reuse of the building. But we want to be, a committee approval has to be tied to plans, has to be tied to specific plans. And what's in front of the committee today is the application for the demolition of the chapel wing. So we did not want to tie it to sort of hypothetical or conceptual plans that haven't been finalized when we don't know the details of that yet. These plans, or some version of these plans, when they are finalized, will require heritage permit approval. So there are future plans, but they're not finalized. So that's why we did not bring them to committee. In terms of the connection to the adaptive reuse component, Eric, if I can ask you to go just the next slide, 25. And yep, that would be perfect. So as part of the condition of approval, if you look at 1A, you can see that we've added a condition that the approval of the zoning, I'll start again, approval of the application to alter the building, conditional upon the approval of the zoning bylaw amendment to permit the existing de Châtelet building to be converted to a school, and that such amendment be in full force and effect. And then on the next slide, Eric, within the zoning bylaw amendment report that's going to planning committee on Thursday, we've added a holding zone to the building itself, which you can see there, part 5. The holding symbol may not be removed until the signing of an agreement with the city for its use as a school or community use, or the submission of an application for a building permit relating to abatement or remediation work for a school or community use. So I'll just leave that up on screen so that it is so that people have the chance to read it. But that's part of the zoning bylaw amendment report going forward Thursday. And the idea there is to tie the heritage permit application that we have in front of the committee today to the adaptive reuse sort of as tightly as we could.
Just a follow-up question, Chair King. Does this mean that a demolition permit will not be issued until there is an application for adaptive reuse, not just the zoning, but an application for adaptive reuse for heritage approval.
No, through you, Chair, the submission of additional heritage permits is not included as part of a condition. So that has not been made part of a condition for approval. We have the condition related to the zoning bylaw amendment being in force and effect, and then the holding symbol that's on the screen here regarding the agreement or the submission of a building permit for abatement or remediation work, but not a heritage permit application. Part of the reason for not including it is that this could be a phased project. So if the school were to open in, let's say, fall of 2021, there may be a heritage permit application associated with alteration to the entrances. And then in the future, there may be a heritage permit application for the addition of a gymnasium. But we don't know the timing for those heritage permit applications. So I do have a fear that we would be sort of assigning an indefinite hold on an approval without knowing what the timeline would be.
Thank you very much. And Chair King, I have a second question, which has to do with the portion of the land towards the river where the footprint of the existing chapel wing occupies right now. And that is, will the new buildings that are to be built by the regional group towards the river, will they be subject to any heritage review because they will be crossing the footprint of the former chapel wing if that is approved for being demolished?
Through you, Chair, the additional buildings to the east of the Deschantelet buildings would not require heritage approval because they are not they're not included within the designation. I would say the heritage review process would happen through an addendum to the cultural heritage impact statement, but no heritage approval is required for those buildings, and that's been consistent with the other development on the site as well.
Those are the end of my questions. Thank you, Chair King.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you so much. And we do have a final request for questions of staff by Councillor Menard.
Thanks very much, Chair King. I appreciate that. I have a number of questions and I'll have some comments. If this committee and planning committee decides that demolition is not in the best interests of the community or the building for adaptive reuse, will the sale to the school board proceed? And I guess that's a question for staff or regional or the school board.
Through you, Chair, I think that's a question better suited to regional or the school board.
And I'm willing to entertain if the subcommittee permits an answer from the school board if they are online.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to reiterate that the current agreement of purchase and sale with regional dictates that there must be a demolition. And so if the demolition wasn't to proceed, there would be a need for an amendment and discussion and negotiation with regional.
Okay, and can I just hear from regional on that as well? Conditions of sale are made often, and sometimes they're waived as well, scratched out and initial beside. So I just want to hear from regional on that point as well.
So Councillor, I can't answer that question. It is a condition of sale today, and if the demolition permit was denied, then the school board and ourselves would have to go back to the negotiating table, and I can't answer where we will land on that.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that. The heritage application is conditional on the zoning bylaw being approved on Thursday with other conditions that the holding symbol indicates. What happens if the bylaw is approved but the sale of the building to the school board falls through for other reasons. If staff can answer that question, could the demolition still go forward at that point?
Through you, Chair, if the conditions of the zoning report and the holding zone are met, then yes, the demolition could go forward. So what the conditions are, what the application is tied to is exactly what those conditions say. So once they're met, the holding zone could be lifted and the demolition could go forward.
And I think that's important. That's why I want those conditions to be fairly stringent at this point. And I do have some direction on that, Chair, and I can give that in a moment after the next couple of questions. So, who is actually responsible for the demolition of the chapel wing? That's regional. Yeah. Okay. And in this case, it seems as though the chapel could be demolished without the school or community center proceeding, despite the conditions we've put on it. And so that's my concern. And so I want to give direction now to make sure we're working as much as possible to shore those up. And so the direction is that city staff work in conjunction with the local councillor in advance of planning committee on September 10th to ensure the holding condition is sufficient to prevent the demolition of the chapel wing should a final sale to the CCE with authorities in place for a mixed-use facility not occur, including more substantive information needed for adaptive reuse, and work on a process to review opportunities for a display within the remaining building that would commemorate the chapel. So I'll give that direction now. My understanding is staff is prepared to accept that direction.
Through you, Chair, I believe we are, but I would just defer the question to or maybe I will just confirm rather with Christine Enta, our legal counsel, if she has any comments on that.
Chair, and excuse me while I come online. Chair, there's one concern with that in terms of the zoning. So we're dealing with two separate pieces of legislation. The application today is under the Ontario Heritage Act, and that's under Section 33 for alteration to a heritage attribute. On Thursday, the planning application is dealing with zoning under the Planning Act. And while staff have tried to tie it, I think we need to be concerned with the idea of zoning for a particular user. And that is something that would leave the city open to exposure. So for example, the holding provision tied to the particular sale to this school or school board would be zoning for a specific user, which is why the staff recommendation is crafted in the way that it is. So certainly, I think the direction to staff is good in that staff do wish to work with the ward councillor and the Department of Development Review and Planning in order to ensure that all concerns are met on this, but to tie it as tightly as ensuring the sale proceeds to a particular user could be problematic for the city from a challenge perspective.
So I suppose the question to Councillor Menard is, are you willing to amend the direction so that we would fall within those parameters?
Oh, no, I understand what Ms. Enta is saying. The direction doesn't need to be amended. It speaks to that already. It's about ensuring that we have that discussion so that the holding symbol as it's currently crafted meets the objectives as best as possible. So I think we're good with the direction, and we'll have to see how things push out at planning committee. But I certainly understand what you're saying, Chair, and what Ms. Enta has indicated. So we'll work together on that before planning. If I can move on after that direction has been given.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I'll accept that as a formal direction.
Okay, thanks very much, Chair. And so I just have a few other questions. The view of the chapel from the multi-use pathway behind the Deschâtelet building is also important to the community, though it's not protected within the cultural landscape portion of the heritage designation. Is there a way to retain some of the visual connection between the river pathway and the Deschâtelet building that could be enforced either through this application or in the future? I understand there's a development potential back there with other buildings that Regional's been talking about, and I understand that. but there's an element of concern around the heritage aspects of those viewpoints from the river itself, not just from Main Street. So I don't know if someone can address that as well.
Through you, Chair, the view of the building from the river, as you mentioned, Councillor, it's not part of the heritage designation. We don't have any views identified as heritage attributes or being required to be maintained. So that would maybe be a discussion between yourself, the community, and the applicant, but it would not be something we'd be looking for as part of a heritage permit application.
Okay, thanks for that. And the demolition of the chapel hinges on somewhat on the calculations that the space is not large enough to house a gym, which is planned for the parcel north of the Châtelet building, amongst many other issues. But can you please, before the planning committee, send us the dimensions for the potential northern parcel and space requirements for a gym in the northern portion? I believe it is for a large scale gym that would fit there, but I just want to make sure we see the dimensions in advance, if that's possible. I don't know if JC's on the line.
Through you, Chair, Councillor, just to be clear, you're looking for the dimensions of the requirements for a full-size gym, and the dimensions of the parcel to the north?
The parcel to the north is where the full-size gym is being planned for, and so yes.
Sorry, and you want the dimensions sort of for both of those is what you're looking for? The dimensions of the part, yeah, okay,
yes,
sure.
Thank you for that. The other comments I just want to make is that, you know, this is a very difficult decision. I do regret the potential removal of the chapel wing. This is part of the jewel that makes up the treasure that is the Deschâtelet building. And while this is the case, it also represents an important community piece towards the construction of a community center, a school, potential for affordable housing units. And thank you to Councillor McKenney for raising that. It's another important point, all within the Deschâtelet building and surrounding it. And so, you know, returning life and community utility to this historic site, it is difficult though, when looking at the situation in front of us, to square those two, which is why the direction I gave is so important, to make sure that all of those other elements are coming to fruition, you know, for adaptive reuse, if we're going to be losing one of the assets like this within the community. I know heritage staff have linked the application to the proposed, you know, reuse. I was happy with Mr. Podolsky's comments around that. I think helped clarify where we are. I know an MOU is being worked on right now between the City Recreation Department and the school board on a community center and the reuse of the building, and is scheduled to go to council in October for approval. I'm also very aware that the Old Ottawa East Community Association has been very clear about their resolution, and they're not the only ones. The Community Activity Group of Old Ottawa East has also signed a letter of interest outlining mutual community objectives that could be achieved through the thoughtful integration of a school and community center and gymnasium facility within the larger neighborhood. You know, given the heritage nature of the chapel wing, I do understand the objections to its demolition. And, you know, I think neither the city, the school board, or the current owner of the property are willing or able to renovate and reuse the chapel. We support this application as a means towards enabling community use of the site. And so, though it is difficult and I think a tough decision to make for many parties, I think this is the right direction, and I'll be looking for more information for staff in advance of Thursday's planning committee to make sure that we've got confidence moving forward. I appreciate the time today, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Menard. And I'm going to just add on to what you, in a sense, were saying procedurally. At this point, I'm going to ask committee members whether they have any wrap-up comments before they vote. I'd like just to take the opportunity to apologize to members as at council. And as you might know, I'm a relatively new member of council. You know, often at questions, we also provide lines of elements of debate, and obviously I was making the assumption that people would do that at their question period, at the question time, but I don't know if that exceeds the rules in terms of rules of procedure. So I just, for clarity, I want to ensure that committee members do have the opportunity to make any wrap-up comments if they feel that they want to before the vote. And I do see that member Podolsky has his hand raised.
Yes, thank you very much. To make a few wrap-up comments. What I'll preface my comments by saying is that I'm going to be voting to refuse the application. This is a very tough and adventurous effort on the part of the community and regional group to find an appropriate use. And I really do like the participation of the school board in this, as well as city staff who are trying to work towards a viable proposal to bring in a community use for it. And I'm very, very hopeful that somehow there would be a affordable residential component. The reason that I reluctantly will vote to refuse the application is that I think it is premature. There is no need to demolish the building yet until there is a firm proposal for the adaptive reuse and addition to the building for community and housing and for school uses. I don't think there's any rush to do it. It is not like the case of the Chateau Laurier parking garage addition, which was deemed to be unsafe. And so I think that I would encourage other members of the committee to consider this, but I think that I would recommend that the proposal be brought back after the agreement is made between the school board and the community and the city, and including a housing component, come back with a proposal for the adaptive reuse of the building, which at that point, if it includes the demolition of the chapel wing, then it might be a very, very valid trade-off. But at the moment, I think that it is putting the cart before the horse. And I'd just like to add one other comment, and that has to do with what Councillor Menard raised, was the question of the views from the river towards the Châtelet building. Initially, the award-winning master plan that was produced by my colleagues Hoban Architecture included the full adaptive reuse of the Châtelet building. And from an early version, which had quite good views from the river to the Châtelet building, the latest version, which has no status or hasn't been involved in any public consultation yet, shows a wall of 6-story residential buildings that would limit the views from the river to the Châtelet building. And I think that that would impoverish the appreciation of it from the riverside, which is of course the public realm. So there are my comments, Chair King, and I look forward to hearing the views of my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. And we do have Vice Chair Quinn's hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to begin by thanking everyone for all the work that was clearly put to this proposal from all parties, and for the solid presentations that we heard today, this morning. But I would like to begin by coming back again to the value of this wing to the evolution and the history of the site, and to thank my colleague for raising the question of standard 2 of the guidelines, and recognizing that the chapel is considered significant and identified in the designation, but that the wing is not, is of course highly problematic. You really can't have one without the other. But I also will not be voting to support the staff recommendation today, for the same reasons as my colleague Podolsky. I agree that this is, I think, premature for all of the reasons that were brought forward. The unknown factors. The interesting side of this for me is hearing Councillor Menard and Councillor McKenney really looking to see some much firmer information around conditions before this arrives at Planning Committee. And of course, from my perspective, as a member of another of this subcommittee, I too want to see those kinds of that kind of solidity that isn't here before us today. And I also think that Monsieur Poulin certainly indicated that the demolition of the wing was not a requested condition. It has evolved that way. And clearly in response to a question about whether it's a deal breaker or not for the school board, I'm not hearing that it is. It would reopen a need for an amendment to the agreement, but it's not a deal breaker. And I think there's still opportunity for this to progress before we need to make a decision on the Heritage Wing. And I just want to remind my colleagues that that is in fact this committee's responsibility. It's the protection of the heritage value of this site. And so with that in mind, I cannot in all good conscience vote to support the demolition of a very important wing that includes a very important modernist chapel designed by an important Canadian modernist architect. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Vice Chair Quinn. And I don't see anybody else with their hands raised, so I will venture some comments if you'd permit me as well. I share, I think, some reluctance on this file with my colleagues, Councillor Menard and Councillor McKinney, but I am ultimately supportive of the staff recommendation because it does allow for adaptive reuse of the existing building for a purpose other than for which it was originally built or designed for, namely the conversion of the building into a mixed-use facility, which includes an elementary school, a city-operated community center, and the potential residential uses, especially the fact that those uses are aimed to be social housing uses. I do agree with my colleagues that we will need some stronger direction and some stronger indications. And I do believe that that process is better better suited for planning. So it will be addressed at Planning Committee. It's very important. I think adaptive reuse is very key to this project. And we must seek, and this is where I do agree with our heritage staff, I think we must seek that balance between the proposed alterations and the balance of cultural heritage preservation with establishment of the long-term use of the building. I do believe that the proposal will allow the building to continue to evolve while conserving the fundamental cultural heritage value of the structure. I think it is important. I know it was stated before that there have been past examples in our city of buildings that have just been waiting and waiting and waiting for adaptive reuse. I think we have a catalyst reuse here in this project, but as my colleagues have said, obviously we need some stronger direction to ensure that we get to the place that we want to get in terms of that use, especially the affordable housing use. So that's why I'm willing to vote in favor of this report. And now, obviously, we will move to a recorded vote.
Member Halsell?
As Mr. Laurier said, a lot of this comes down to risk, and I don't think I could support risking this heritage building right now, so I don't support the application.
Member Podolsky?
I agree. I vote to refuse the application.
Member Shirelli? Councillor McKenney?
Yes.
Member Conforti?
No.
Councillor Brockington,
Yes.
Councillor Moffat,
Yes.
Vice Chair Quinn,
No.
Chair Gower, pardon me, Chair King,
Yes.
4 yeas, 4 nays.
Does the matter rise to Planning Committee?
And I'll actually defer to the coordinator there.
Mr. Chair, this matter will rise to Planning Committee at its meeting this Thursday. It will have no recommendation from the subcommittee as the recommendation is lost on a tie.
I would like to give notice I will be moving this forward at committee.
Thank you, Councillor Brockington. And so the next item on our agenda is number 2, application to alter 235 Mariposa Avenue, a property located in the Rockcliffe Park Heritage Conservation District, designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act. I do believe that there is a replacement motion, technical motion, I believe, that needs to be introduced.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I would like to bring that motion forward if I may.
Yes, thank you. Please proceed.
Whereas report ACS 2020, thank you, it's suddenly shot forward in my screen, sorry, I'll start again. Whereas report ACS 2020 PIERHU 0018 recommends approval of an application under the Ontario Heritage Act to alter the existing building at 235 Mariposa Avenue. Whereas the Rockcliffe Park Residents Association Heritage Committee had outstanding concerns about the exterior cladding materials of the proposed alteration, and whereas Heritage Planning staff worked with the applicant and the Heritage Committee to address their concerns and reached a satisfactory compromise to all parties on a different primary cladding material for the exterior of the building that further improves the proposal's compatibility with the Heritage Conservation District. Therefore, be it resolved that 1, the plans by Jim Bell Architectural Design, Inc., dated July 9th, 2020, and received on July 14th, 2020, be replaced by the Jim Bell Architectural Design, Inc. plans dated and received September 3rd, 2020, reflecting a change in primary cladding from cultured stone to brick for the exterior of the building. 2, that recommendation 2 be updated to reflect the new plans accordingly. Is there more? I can't see my other section. Thank you.
Sorry. No, and I think that completes that motion.
Yes,
so thank you for introducing it. Can staff please provide an overview of this report?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think Eric has a presentation to show, so I'll just wait for him to bring that up on the screen for the committee. Can everyone hear me? Okay.
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this application relates to the property at 235 Mariposa Avenue. On the next slide, you'll see that the property is located in the Rockcliffe Park Heritage Conservation District, and it's designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act. It's located on the north side of Mariposa Avenue, mid-block between Springfield Road and Manor Avenue. On the next slide, you'll see this is a photo of the existing property. The property currently functions as the official residence of the High Commissioner to Uganda. And the property currently contains a 2.5-story stucco-clad house constructed in the 1950s The garage as well as a rear shed dormer are later additions to the house. And this is a grade 2 non-contributing property in the HCD. So the property features typical landscape elements of Rockcliffe with its open front yard, mature trees and hedges. In the rear yard, it's quite deep and currently features an in-ground pool and a shed. So this property is also on the city's heritage watch list. Next slide. Here are some images of the surrounding grade 1 properties on the north side of Mariposa Avenue. Next slide. And these are on the south side of Mariposa. So as you can see, the buildings in this block are generally 2 to 2.5 stories in height, with a mix of complex roofs, dormers, a variety of entrance types, and a mix of natural materials, including stucco and brick. Next slide. So this application is to undertake several alterations to the existing grade 2 house. The proposal includes an extension of the house to the rear and one to the existing garage to the west. And these are highlighted on the site plan on the screen in red. Next slide. The proposal also includes a request to increase the height of the main building. So in this image, you can see the outline of the existing structure in red with the proposed building in black and white. So these changes will meet the proposal, or rather the provisions outlined in the zoning bylaw for height and setback, with the exception of a variance that's required to recognize an existing legal non-complying side yard setback on the east. Next slide. So just to give an idea of the proposed changes, on the left of the screen are the existing building elevations and the proposed elevations on the right. You can see the alterations include the removal of the existing stucco, the addition of gable dormers on the front facade, as well as a shed dormer to replace an existing dormer at the rear. Brick cladding is proposed for the primary material for the main building and the extension to the rear, with horizontal siding for secondary massing, such as the garage and the dormers. The window styles and overall fenestration pattern will be modified to reflect more traditional patterns seen throughout the HCD. And a new covered entry will replace an existing front canopy on the front facade. Next slide. So this is the rear elevation, which shows the proposed covered porch and patio area on the ground floor with a second floor terrace that will replace the existing rear canopy and a small second floor balcony. Next slide. In terms of landscaping, the existing semicircular driveway will be replaced with a linear driveway and narrow walkways to the rear. The existing pool will be relocated along with its associated patio and fencing. A pool house is also proposed to replace the existing shed. No trees or hedges are proposed for removal, and additional new plantings are proposed throughout the property. Next slide. So staff have reviewed this proposal against the Rockcliffe Park HCD plan as outlined in the report and have determined that it meets its objectives and the intent of the policies and guidelines. Staff have also reviewed Parks Canada standards and guidelines and are satisfied that those that apply have been met. Next slide. Actually, we'll skip one more slide, please. So this project was part of our recently implemented pre-consultation pilot program. That pilot is intended to encourage early consultation with not only staff, but also the community association in order to raise concerns and provide feedback on the proposal early in the process. So in this case, the applicant has made several revisions to the project based on multiple rounds of comments that were provided from staff and the community, beginning late last year and stretching into this spring. So over the summer, the applicant submitted this formal application under the Heritage Act. And during that formal circulation, the Community Association raised some additional concerns about the potential impact of the proposal. And those have been forwarded to the committee in advance of today. And those related in part to the primary cladding material that was to be a cultured stone. And that's on the left of the screen. So over the past several weeks, staff have been working with the RPRA and the applicant on ways to address these concerns. And the result of those discussions was to revise the cladding material to be red brick instead, as shown on the right, which staff believe to be even more compatible with the character of the HCD and better meet the guidelines. Next slide. So accordingly, staff are recommending approval of the application with the revised drawings, subject to a condition to provide samples of the final cladding materials. as well as the approval of the landscape plan subject to conditions to ensure tree protection and that the planting list excludes invasive species. And then finally, the recommendation to delegate minor design changes and issue the permit with a 3-year expiry date. Thank you.
Thank you for the report. We do have some registered speakers on this file. The first registered speaker is Nicole Chilton-Jones of Jim Bell Architectural Design.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm actually here more as in a position to answer any questions that are posed, because I believe that Mackenzie has really presented the presentation quite well on our behalf.
Any questions from committee members? I see none. I also see that Jim Bell is also registered. I'm assuming, being from the same firm, that there are probably no questions for Jim either. Does the committee have any questions for staff? And I see no hands up from the committee. So I'd like to give the opportunity for committee members to provide wrap-up comments if they feel it's needed. Oh, and I see Councillor Brockington has his hand up.
I just want to say, Mr. Chair, very briefly, this is a good example of where issues within the community are raised, and there's an opportunity for the proponent and staff and the community to hammer them out with respect to the motion that Vice Chair Quinn read today. So I just want to say I applaud that. That's what really should happen before matters come to subcommittee, and I will be voting in favor of the staff recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Brockington. And I see no other hands, but I will also provide just a short wrap up where I have to say I concur with Councillor Brockington as the ward councillor for this area. You know, as part of the Heritage Planning Branch's new Heritage Pre-Consultation pilot program, the Residents Association's Heritage Committee was able to participate in pre-consultation, and that did impact the nature of this application. I think that that's the road where we want to go down, a little bit more consultation with the community and developers, so that we get obviously not to unanimity, but to a certain level of agreement and improvement in terms of the types of projects that move forward. So I would be in favor of supporting this item. Noting that there were no questions, I'm assuming this is not going to yeas and nays. Is the report carried?
Chair, if I may, there's the matter of carrying the motion as well.
Oh, yes. And yes, the addition of the motion as well.
Carried.
Carried.
Thank you. So item 3 is an item from the Office of the City Clerk. 3, status update, Built Heritage Subcommittee inquiries and motions for the period ending August 21st, 2020. There is no presentation. I know that this item was circulated to the subcommittee. Does the committee have any questions for staff on this item? Seeing no hands up, is the report received? Received. In-camera items, there are none to date. Notices of motion for consideration at a subsequent meeting, there's none to date. Inquiries, none to date. And there is just a other business. I'm seeing no other business. One of the final items is planning circulations, official plan amendments, and zoning bylaw amendment proposal summary, Gladstone Station District secondary plan. There is a planning circulation on the agenda. which was distributed to members prior to the meeting. Members of the public had the opportunity to comment through DevApps on ottawa.ca. There is no specific Ontario Heritage Act application associated with this project. Is there any other business? Seeing none. Adjournment. On adjournment, is the motion carried?
Carried.
Thank you. So we're adjourned. Thank you, everyone. The next regular meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, October 13th, 2020.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.